Good morning and welcome to the Justice Committee's 5th meeting of 2020. We have no apologies. Agenda item 1 is a decision on whether to take item 4, which is consideration of our work programme in private. Are we all agreed? We are agreed, thank you. Agenda item 2 is consideration of the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill at stage 2. I would ask members to refer to their copy of the bill and the marshalled list of amendments and groupings for this item. And I welcome Humza Yousaf, Cabinet Secretary for Justice, and his officials to the meeting. We'll also be joined by Gordon Lyndhurst for consideration of his amendment a little later on. And we now begin with consideration of amendments. The question is that section 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Call amendment 14 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with amendment 15 and 17. Cabinet Secretary to move amendment 14 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Good morning, Convener and Committee. I move the amendments in my name. These amendments make minor and technical changes to the bill. Schedule 1 to the bill makes detailed provision on matters including the appointment, status, terms of office and remuneration of the Commissioner. Paragraphs 7.1 and section 3 currently provide that the Parliamentary Corporation must pay or make arrangements for payment to the Commissioner for such remuneration, allowances, pensions and gratuities as the Parliamentary Corporation determines. The Parliamentary Corporation therefore already has the discretion as to what amount is to be set. My amendments 14 and 15 simply clarify that the Parliamentary Corporation also has discretion as to whether anything is paid at all, in case there would otherwise be a question as to whether the amount that the Parliamentary Corporation determines to be could be set at zero. Will therefore be for the Parliamentary Corporation to decide on whether payments are made and what level. This will provide maximum flexibility for the Parliamentary Corporation to determine matters as it sees fit. Amendment 17 simply fixes a typographical error in section 2.4a of the bill. Convener, I move amendments in my name.
Okay. Do members have any questions or comments for the Cabinet Secretary? Cabinet Secretary, you don't need to wind up. So the question is that Amendment 14 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. I'll agree. Thank you. Call Amendment 15 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 14. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
The question is the Schedule 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Call Amendment 16 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 3, 18, 24 and 7. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 16 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. My Amendment 16 adds the PERC, the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, to the list of persons subject to the oversight of the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner. Amendment 24 makes a change to section 7, subsection 1, in lines with this, to include the PERC as a person who is subject to the Code of Practice. My Amendment 18 adds the Commissioner for the retention and use of biometrics material to the list of bodies the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner can work jointly with, assist or consult. This was something the committee had asked me to do in its stage 1 report, and I'm happy to oblige. The Commissioner for the retention and use of biometrics material has the functions of keeping under review national security determinations made by the Chief Constable of Police Scotland and the retention and use of biometric material by the police for terrorism investigations and national security purposes. Amendment 18 reflects the importance of the Scottish and UK Biometrics Commissioners coordinating their activities when carrying out their roles in Scotland by explicitly mentioning the Commissioner for the retention and use of biometric materials in section 3. Turning now to James Kelly's amendments 3 and 7. These seek to include local authorities, health boards, the Scottish Prison Service and external contractors who provide biometric services as bodies who fall within the oversight of the Commissioner and who are subject to the Commissioner's Code of Practice. I recognise that members are keen to provide the public with the fullest protection against the mishandling of biometric data in a criminal justice and policing context. That is something we all want. As I said before, the existing provisions in the bill already go some way to cover the activities of other bodies. The Commissioner's oversight function would allow the Commissioner to review and report on the activities of public and private sector bodies that provide biometric data services to the police, the SP or PERC. Furthermore, the code of practice could require that any contracts those bodies entered into with third parties be compliant with the terms of the code. I will consider a consultation in due course about including further persons or bodies in respect of the criminal justice or policing functions, but only once sufficient time has passed to allow the current oversight provisions to bed in. This would be in line with what the committee recommended. However, adding all these other bodies now, when the Commissioner's Office will just be getting up and running, I think would be premature. For the avoidance of doubt, if James Kelly's amendment is supported, then the expansion in scope which he proposes is no small undertaking. There would be a substantial cost associated with it. There are 14 regional health boards. The National Prison Service has 15 prisons holding over 8,000 prisoners. There are a total of, as we all know, 32 local authorities. There has been no consultation, none whatsoever, with either COSLA, with the health boards, or indeed with the prison service on this proposal. As things stand, the Commissioner is due to work 0.6 of a full-time equivalent. These additional costs would require that role to be a full-time role, as well as undoubtedly additional staff being employed, again all at a huge cost and without any consultation. I urge members not to be rushed into expanding the scope of the Commissioner's oversight this time, but instead allow time for proper reflection, proper discussion, proper consultation, proper analysis of the cost with the bodies who will be affected.
James Kelly to speak to Amendment 3 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener, and I move Amendments 3 and 7 in my name. Amendment 3 seeks to extend the remit of the Commissioner to public bodies including local authorities, health boards, ministers in respect of the Scottish Prison Service and contractors who are also covered by these groups. Amendment 7 is a logical follow-on from that in that it seeks to extend the remit of the code to also cover the bodies that I have listed in the amendments and mentioned earlier. I seek to move these amendments on 3 points. I think that the extension is logical. I think it's important for public confidence and thirdly for future proofing. I welcome the extensions that the Cabinet Secretary has made beyond the original drafting of the bill. However, I don't believe that goes far enough and it leaves a gap in the provision. I think in relation to health boards, local authorities, the prison service and contractors working with these bodies, there are clearly huge issues around the use and the collection of biometrics, and if we're setting up a biometrics commissioner, I think it's important that he has an appropriate scope across all these bodies. This approach is supported by the Open Rights Campaign Group and also by Amnesty. Secondly, I believe that this approach is important for public confidence. If we're going to establish a biometrics commissioner, the commissioner should have a proper reach for his work, and if there are gaps, then the public will question why these gaps haven't been covered. Finally, in terms of future-proofing, this is an area that the committee heard where technology is moving very quickly, and I therefore think it's important that we cover all these bodies because there will be extensions in technology and other issues that will come up, and I think it's important to get the scope and the reach right at this stage, and therefore I move these amendments in my name.
Thank you. John Finney.
Thank you, Convener. I support the Cabinet Secretary's move to include PERC in the provisions of this legislation. I've spoken previously about the policing function, and the policing function isn't exclusively exercised by Police Scotland, and I think this is an appropriate move. I also support James Kelly's amendments. I think for the reasons he very clearly articulated, there is support from Open Rights, and I should refer to my register of interest as a member of Amnesty and Amnesty for this. I think public confidence is very, very important, but what we repeatedly heard was the need for a public debate on this. Now, I hear what the Cabinet Secretary says about the level of consultation, but of course there was the independent advisory group, and made reference to this. So I think we're having an opportunity here to ensure that we future-proof, as James Kelly has said. So I'll be supporting both lots of amendments.
Liam Kerr, followed by Fulton and Rona.
Yeah, I address my comments. I think there's merit in the Cabinet Secretary bringing in Amendment 16. I remain somewhat concerned about Mr Kelly's amendments at 3 and 7. Mr Kelly talks about the extension being logical and for public confidence, but I'm not sure that makes it practical. And I remain concerned about, I think the Cabinet Secretary was right to highlight the possible costs. I'd really prefer to understand a bit more about that. And also this committee was very concerned throughout its evidence taking about whether the new Commissioner would have sufficient capacity, given the, I think, the part-time nature and the volume of funding. And it just strikes me that isn't there a risk that if we amend in significant extra responsibilities, that we inadvertently overburden the Commissioner before we've even discovered whether the capacity is there for what was originally put in plus the perk in the first place?
Fulton?
Thanks, Convener. I want to speak in relation to James Kelly's Amendments 3 and 7. Don't necessarily disagree with the premise or the basis of them, but I feel that from my point of view they've come a bit out of the blue, unlike Amendment 18 put forward by the Cabinet Secretary, which was referred to in the Stage 1 report. I do feel that they've come out around without any consultation, as has already been mentioned. I don't feel that we took enough, or really in some cases any evidence during Stage 1 about some of these. We would really, from my point of view, we'd really be needing to hear from NHS, COSLA in the prison service, amongst others, about these specific amendments. So at this point in time, I don't think that I can support them, and it feels a wee bit out of the blue.
Rona, then Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'll be opposing Amendments 3 and 7. On fairly clear grounds, the main one, I suppose, being cost. The capacity issue that Liam Kerr mentioned. I think the scope has become far too wide for a part-time commissioner at the start of his post. Our Stage 1 report didn't recommend adding those extra bodies right now, and the government has indicated that it may be appropriate in future to extend the remit. So I just think that adding them at this stage would be the wrong thing to do, and I'll be opposing them.
And Liam MacArthur.
Start thanking James Kelly for lodging the amendments. I think it's right that the committee didn't take a firm view on this sort of extension at Stage 1, but the purpose of Stage 2 is to probe. I think the points that James Kelly's made about public expectation and public confidence and future-proofing are absolutely right. And if this extension at this time is a bridge too far, and I rather suspect it is for the reasons others have articulated, I think we should at least be painting a pathway to the point at which biometrics and the use of biometrics technology in these areas and potentially others is achieved. I think that would be the public expectation, and therefore I think these amendments, while I'm not I think minded to support them in their current form, I think serve a very useful purpose in aiding us towards where we need to get to. And briefly in passing, I welcome confirmation of the Cabinet Secretary's extension of the bill to cover PERC, which he committed to do during the Stage 1 debate.
Shona?
Yeah, just to add, in terms of, I oppose James Kelly's amendments on the very straightforward basis that I don't think we took sufficient evidence. I don't think the evidence we took in the Stage 1 report supports the extension of this at this stage. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the evidence we took in our discussion as a committee that actually we landed on the basis of a phased approach being the best way forward, and therefore I think that's been acknowledged by the Cabinet Secretary. It might be helpful for the Cabinet Secretary to maybe say a little bit more about that phased approach in his summing up.
Well, can I welcome the inclusion of PERC to come under the review, the Commissioner's oversight. And there's been a good discussion on this. That future-proofing is something we should be looking at if there's any gaps. But equally, there are huge implications about how this would work in practice. So I tend to agree rather with Liam MacArthur. Absolutely right to be discussing this and put this firmly in the sights of the Cabinet Secretary at this stage, but maybe consider if it doesn't pass, then how it could be looked at as stage 3. I know you want to come in again, James.
Okay, yeah, if I can just address a couple of points. First of all, in terms of Fulton McGregor's point that this amendment had come out of the blue, I don't agree with that. It was made clearly by the the point was made clearly by the Open Rights Group and also Amnesty in terms of submissions to the committee and also ahead of the Stage 1 debate. It was covered in the Stage 1 debate. I specifically mentioned it, as did John Finney. In terms of the costs, I do acknowledge there are additional costs. However, this is as we spoke throughout the evidence, this is a serious role we're asking the Commissioner to undertake. I think we're at stage 2, and if these amendments were passed, then there is opportunity at stage 3 to take account of that and to upgrade the role of the Commissioner. And ultimately, I believe that there are serious issues here in terms of capturing data, getting it right, ensuring that human rights are observed, and therefore it is right that the scope should be widened and that any consequential cost should be made.
Cabinet Secretary to wind up.
Thanks very much. Convener, I very much associate myself with the remarks made by Liam MacArthur, Liam Kerr, Fulton McGregor and yourself, Convener. I think it was helpful for James Kelly to bring these amendments forward in a sense to debate and discuss the point. And I think also extremely well-intentioned to bring these in, and I know reflecting some of the concerns raised by very important external stakeholder groups. But I go back to the central point that I made and try to give some reassurances. I think it was John Finney that spoke about future-proofing the bill, but it's for that very reason that the bill contains within it a power to amend the resulting act to include other bodies. So there is that kind of future-proofing in there, that if it was thought that actually more bodies should be added, then being able to do that in a way, in a phased way, I think is already exists. So that power to extend the list of bodies does exist. I suppose the other point I wanted to give reassurance to James Kelly in particular was again under the Act, under Section 2(3)(a), the Commissioner's tasked with keeping under review the acquisition, retention, use and destruction of biometric data by, and this is the important bit, or on behalf of the bodies named in the bill. So if the police are using, for example, medical professionals to collect biometrics data, what those medical professionals do is already something the Commissioner will absolutely be looking at. So I think we have a Commissioner that has a defined and set role. We have a period which I think we should allow absolutely for phasing in, and then of course if Parliament and others think that list should be extended, that those powers should be amended to include other bodies, then that exists in the Act as it does. But without doing that without any consultation, costings, with really substantial bodies, I think would be the wrong way to go. But again, I thank James Kelly for bringing these amendments forward to allow for what I think has been a good debate.
Question is that Amendment 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Call Amendment 3 in the name of James Kelly, already debated with Amendment 3. James Kelly to move. Definitely moved. The question is that Amendment 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. All those in favour, please show. Right. All those against, please show. And there are no abstentions.
2 in favour, 7 against.
2 in favour, 7 against, so that amendment is not agreed. Call Amendment 4 in the name of John Finney, grouped with Amendment 13 and 30. John Finney to move Amendment 4 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener, and I do move Amendment 4 in my name. And this amendment is about the role the Commissioner could play in keeping all technologies under review We heard a lot of evidence about the efficiency of the equipment that has been used, atrociously ridiculous success rates, 2% success rates, when we are talking about people's human rights and also the importance of community safety. We want to have effective equipment if it is actually ever deployed. Then it's important that the Commissioner has some oversight role in relation to this. And that's in respect of the technology that we deployed in respect of acquisition, retention, use and destruction of biometric data. So I hope members would support this modest proposal.
Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 30 and other amendments in the group.
Okay, thanks, Convener. I'll start by confirming my support for the amendments from John Finney and this group for the reasons he's set out. Under Section 2, it's already the case that the Commissioner will monitor the extent to which the relevant bodies comply with the Code of Practice. My Amendment 30 provides that if in the course of monitoring the impact of the Code, the Commissioner finds it's been disregarded, that information must be made public. Colleagues will recall lengthy discussions during stage 1 about the enforcement powers in this bill and whether or not they went far enough. For many, including Scottish Human Rights Commission, Open Rights Group and others, the conclusion was that they did not. The Government has always maintained that the bill's strength is to be found in the persuasive powers of naming and shaming, or at least the threat of it. In the Cabinet Secretary's own words, quote, "The power of reputational damage should not be underestimated." This, of course, was a view shared by the current UK Commissioner in his evidence. However, without requiring the Commissioner to make breaches of the Code public, I'm concerned that it becomes a risk that too many may be prepared to take. I appreciate there may need to be a degree of latitude where breaches are very minor and have been quickly rectified once identified. But for the public to have confidence in these new powers, transparency, it seems to me, is absolutely key. In that context, Amendment 30 is a sensible step, I think, in the right direction. I hope something the committee and indeed the government will support. Thank you.
Do members have any questions, comments? Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. On Amendment 4, I do not consider that Amendment 4 is necessary. The Commissioner's review duty in Section 23A of the bill already implicitly includes the function of keeping under review the methods or technologies used to acquire, retain or destroy biometric data. This is because it is phrased as, and I quote, "the law, policy and practice relating to the acquisition, retention, use and destruction of biometric data." The technologies used would relate very much to that data. Furthermore, if John Finney's Amendment 4 is supported, then this may cast doubt on whether the Commissioner's function in Section 23B of the bill includes a function to promote public awareness and understanding of the power and duties of police and the SPA have in relation to the use of biometric technologies, given that no similar reference to biometric technologies is being added in that provision. I therefore ask John Finney not to press Amendment 4. However, if the committee wishes to see an express reference to technologies, then I'd be happy to work with the member on a suitable amendment ahead of stage 3, and therefore ask John Finney not to press Amendment 4 this time. In terms of Amendment 13, this would require persons mentioned in Section 2.1 of the bill to comply with the Commissioner's recommendations regarding biometric technologies. I consider that it would be entirely acceptable to require a person to indicate what steps they are taking in response to the Commissioner's recommendation and to make these steps known to the Scottish Ministers in Parliament. I do, however, have concerns about the way that subsection 3C of this amendment requires those specified in Section 2.1 of the bill not to use a technology if the Commissioner recommends it's not to be used. I suppose there are a number of difficulties with this. Firstly, I don't consider it acceptable that a recommendation from the Commissioner on the use of a certain kind of technology should be binding to the extent that it would impinge on the operational independence of the police. The SPA and HMICS, for example, do not have similar powers. Secondly, these would not actually be recommendations at all. Subsection 3C of the amendment, if supported, would allow the Commissioner to effectively make the law on the use of biometric technologies without any consultation or approval mechanism in place. I consider this would subvert, frankly, the role of Parliament. Thirdly, the law must be accessible. If the Commissioner's recommendations were effectively to be law, then a person will have to trawl through the Commissioner's reports as well as the Code of Practice and the substantive law to find out what technologies they are allowed to use. The rules regarding technologies would not be perhaps accessible as they should be. And finally, there would also be no mechanism within the bill for these recommendations, which are effectively prohibitions, to be amended or revoked by the Commissioner at a later date. So I therefore ask John Finney not to press Amendment 13. In terms of Amendment 30, Lee MacArthur's amendments, this to some extent duplicates 15(1)(a) of the bill, which provides that the Commissioner may prepare and publish reports about whether persons who are required to have regard to the Code of Practice have done or are doing so. Amendment 30 makes it compulsory to publish reports about failures to have regard to the Code. As is clear from the bill's accompanying documents and from stage 1, it's anticipated that reporting will be a key aspect of the Commissioner's role. I don't necessarily, therefore, consider this amendment to be fully necessary. In addition, the way it's been inserted is slightly confusing because it doesn't alter the Commission's existing discretion to issue reports. This would mean we would be saying that the Commissioner must issue reports on failings, but in the next sentence saying that he or she may do so. So I therefore ask Lee MacArthur not to oppress Amendment 30. However, again, if he's not reassured necessarily by the comments I'm making and still wishes to make this element of reporting mandatory, then I'd be happy to work with them to agree a suitable amendment ahead of stage 3, and therefore would ask Lee MacArthur not to oppress Amendment 30 at this time.
John Finney, to wind up and press or withdraw.
Thank you. It was remiss of me not to refer to my colleague Lee MacArthur's amendment earlier, which I do lend support to, and I think for the reasons he's very well outlined. The Cabinet Secretary, I don't necessarily recognise his characterisation of the intention of 4 there. If I have no concern that someone has to, quote, trawl through information to come up with the appropriate answer when it comes to something that can impact on citizens' human rights and have the level of collateral intrusion that potentially can have. I think we know from the various IT projects that it's hugely important to get things right, and we certainly don't want a situation where, for instance, with the cyber kiosk where the equipment's bought and we have to go along with it because of the expenditure that's there. So I think there are a number of issues, but I'm very happy to engage with the Scottish Government on that issue to come up with something that hopefully meets the intentions that we would all want to see about having quality equipment being deployed, and I'll not press that amendment.
Okay, not pressed. Call Amendment 17 in the name of the Minister, already debated, with Amendment 14. Cabinet Secretary move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Question is that Section 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Call Amendment 18 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with Amendment 16. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 18 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. The question is that Section 3 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. The question is that Sections 4 and 5 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed? Yes. Call Amendment 5 in my name. In a group on its own, I will move and speak to Amendment 5 now. In its Stage 1 report, the Justice Committee recommends that the Scottish Government includes a complaints mechanism within the bill to enable the public to refer issues to the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner on the use of biometrics by Police Scotland and the SPA, or on their lack of compliance with the Code of Practice. This follows many witnesses, including Matthew Rice from Open Rights Group, expressing concern that despite one of the key functions of the Commissioner being to promote public awareness and understanding of the duties and responsibilities of those who acquire, retain, use and delete biometric data, there is no corresponding complaints mechanism whereby a member of the public could raise these concerns with the Commissioner. In his evidence, DCS Scott from Police Scotland acknowledged the importance of the public having the right to complain, and Tom Nelson from the SPA said he thought that the Commissioner would want to hear from the public and understand where their concerns were coming from, and that the ability to engage with and speak to the public would certainly allow the Commissioner to provide assurance to the public and ensure the public and the Commissioner could identify any challenges. Amendment 5 therefore ensures that the legislation provides a complaints mechanism which affords individuals or someone acting on their behalf the right to complain directly to the Biometrics Commissioner about the acquisition, retention, use or destruction of their data by or on behalf of Police Scotland or the Scottish Police Authority. Furthermore, the amendment also takes cognizance of the concerns expressed by the Cabinet Secretary about the risk of duplicating the role of the UK Information Commissioner if the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner had a similar function to look at complaints about biometric data, which can be personal data, which is a reserved matter. And he also considers that, the Cabinet Secretary also considers that the relationship between the UK Information Commissioner and the Biometrics Commissioner should be addressed, and that he is supportive of the Justice Committee's recommendation to have a memorandum of understanding between the two to avoid potential confusion about the two roles, which protects the independence of both offices. Amendment 5 therefore addresses both these concerns with the provision that the Biometrics Commissioner must consult the following organisations or people: the Public Sector Ombudsman, Police Scotland and the SPA, as well as any person or groups it considers appropriate on the Commissioner's proposals for a complaints procedure which must be kept under review and must vary it whenever, after this consultation, the Commissioner considers it appropriate to do so. Now, at this point, I can say that I received a letter from the UK Commissioner commenting on Amendment 5. This came in very late last night. It was distributed to the committee first thing this morning, and the Cabinet Secretary's officials too have a copy. In commenting on Amendment 5, he helpfully points out an error in the amendment in terms of the reference to the Information or Commission Act, which doesn't actually exist. And this can easily be rectified at stage 2, but in the meantime, it should not prohibit the passing of this amendment today if the committee is so minded. Also, helpfully, the UK IOC confirms that complaints about the way in which personal data relating to an identified or identifiable person is handled should be referred to the UK IOC. However, biometric data relating to an identified or identifiable person is deemed to be a special category data and subject to additional safeguards. If, therefore, the complaints process is confined to compliance, then the UK Commission, with the code, then the UK Commissioner says this should clearly be stated on the face of the bill to avoid any ambiguity. And the complaints process in Amendment 5 is confined to compliance with the Code of Practice. Finally, the Cabinet Secretary stresses that, in his view, the Biometrics Commissioner should concentrate on systemic issues in the criminal justice and police context, with systemic oversight driven by a systemic view of Police Scotland and the SPA's activities as they relate specifically to biometric data, rather than resolution of individual complaints. However, this fails to recognise that it is only by being aware and involved in resolving instances where things have gone wrong that systemic improvements can be made and a robust systemic oversight achieved. But more than that, quite simply, as the Justice Committee and many others have pointed out, there is a risk public confidence and transparency a risk to public confidence and transparency if a complaints mechanism is not included in the bill, and I move Amendment 5 in my name. Are there any questions from members? John Finney.
Thank you, Convener. I think, as you're aware, had you not submitted this amendment, then I would have done. So I'm very happy to lend support. I'll speak very briefly because I just think that the public would imagine it's passing strange that there's a public body that there wasn't a complaints mechanism attached to. And I think that's just a very fundamental principle of how we should be. The public should engage with public officials. So I'm very supportive of your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Rona and then Rona.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not going to accept this amendment. I think it's unnecessary that the public can already they're free to make complaints to the Commissioner, and I don't think they need another piece of law to give them permission to complain. This amendment technically only requires a Commissioner to establish a procedure for people to make complaints, but it doesn't actually require the Commissioner to do anything with them. I don't think it should be in the bill. I don't think the bill should oblige the Commissioner to deal with complaints, but the mechanism for people going to the Commissioner with complaints is already there.
Fulton.
I probably agree with what my colleague Rona Mackay said there, but also wanted to add that I know that you've taken head on the fact that the amendment is technically wrong, but I think that it's incorrect, factually incorrect to the extent that the Information Commissioner's Office for the UK have written to us, has taken the time out to write to us, I think is significant. I don't think that we do fully understand what the consequences of this amendment may or may not be, and then therefore I would agree with Rona Mackay that I won't be supporting this just now, but would possibly politely suggest to the member that speaking to the government ahead of stage 3 and getting a factually correct amendment on the table might be the best way forward.
James.
Just briefly, I welcome this amendment. It takes forward the issues that were raised in the committee's Stage 1 report, and I think the point that John Finney made about public confidence, and the public would see it as strange if there wasn't a complaints mechanism in place in relation to the work that the Biometrics Commissioner is undertaking. Therefore, I support this amendment.
Okay. Anyone else? Cabinet Secretary.
Reservations around this amendment. I want to try to make a couple of points, if I may. You refer to the letter that came in late last night from the Information Commissioner's Office. I thank you, Parliamentary Clerks, for giving us sight of that letter on the way in. It does refer, as you rightly say, to that inaccuracy around the Act, but the more substantial point made by the Information Commissioner's Office is the one about the substance of the matter, and I quote directly from the letter. The Information Commissioner's Office says, and again I quote direct, "I would bring the committee's attention to the evidence which I gave during its Stage 1 deliberations, where I made reference to the role of the UK Information Commissioner's Office regarding complaints about the way in which individuals' personal information is handled. Any complaints about the way in which such data are handled should be referred to the ICO. This separation of locus has worked well south of the border, where a Biometrics Commissioner has been in post since 2016. In addition, Convener, you said that the amendment was clearly confined to the code of practice, as the ICO would wish it. I don't believe this is the case. In fact, nowhere in the amendment do the words code of practice appear. I also don't think this is necessary, this amendment. Individuals are free to make complaints to the Commissioner at any time. They do not need the law to give them permission to complain. What the bill deliberately does not do is oblige the Commissioner to investigate complaints or set up a process to deal with them. However, if somebody drew the Commissioner's attention to a relevant and important issue by way of a complaint, then the Commissioner could use their powers to look into the matter further by requiring a body to produce information, for example. That could then lead to the publication of reports, recommendations, or indeed the issuing of a compliance notice. Secondly, the Commissioner's function of dealing with complaints about the processing of biometric data, which can include personal data, closely parallels the functions of the Information Commissioner. The amendment as drafted does not delimit the role of the Biometrics Commissioner and would allow the Commissioner to deal with complaints about breaches of data protection law that should properly, as I say, be dealt with by the Information Commissioner. Yes, thank you. I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. Would the Cabinet Secretary accept that
all of us in our constituency business and lots of organisations have a facility for signposting individuals if the complaint isn't appropriately dealt with by themselves. And I'm trying to imagine a website that may be set up by the Commissioner that wouldn't have a complaints mechanism on it, where every other public body would. It's just passing strange, you would have to acknowledge.
No, I mean, you can make complaints about the Commissioner himself or herself in terms of the role that they fulfil, and we should make that very obvious. In terms of signposting, I'll come back to that because I think the recommendation of an MOU between the Information Commissioner's Office and the Commissioner is absolutely the right way to go. That refers essentially to the point that John Finney makes about signposting. I think I made this point during the debate, but I'll often do that too. In my capacity as constituency MSP, I share an office with a local MP. If matters come where, for example, the Home Office will not engage with me on immigration matters, I can often signpost a constituent to my local MP, and it works perfectly well. There is, in effect, a verbal MOU between me and the local MP as well. Of course I will.
Cabinet Secretary, without wanting to sound facetious, you would understand that the public aren't going about wondering if there's memoranda of understanding between different public bodies. The term complaint is readily understood and should be responded to.
I suppose the point I'm trying to make is, again, referring to the analogy of a constituent, the constituent should, should be free to come to any elected member about any issue. Now, that elected member may choose to refer it to another body, again, in this case, an MP, to deal with an immigration case because the Home Office don't deal with MSPs regularly. What I'm saying here is that a member of the public, there would be nothing stopping them going to a biometrics commissioner to make a complaint. It may be through the MOU that is being suggested, that is then signposted to an information commissioner. Setting up a separate complaints mechanism for the biometrics commissioner, I think, will frankly create some confusion for the public, but more so to cut across the very clear remedy that already exists for members of the public, which is to make a complaint to the information commissioner in respect to processing personal data. I have concerns about that straying into reserve matters. In any event, I think it's better to maintain the delineation that exists between the commissioners, with the Information Commissioner fully investigating complaints from the public and the new Biometrics Commissioner undertaking a monitoring role and making thematic reports. To complement this, I would reiterate the support, as I've already said, for a memorandum of understanding to be drawn up between the Biometrics Commissioner and the Information Commissioner, so there's a common understanding of the roles, and that can be communicated to the public, but also for internal purposes would be important between the two commissioners. I understand that the Information Commissioner is very receptive to that idea. The final point is simply about a number of technical issues. One of them we've already discussed in relation to the Act that doesn't exist, but also, it would only the amendment as it exists only requires the Commissioner to establish a procedure for people to make complaints. It doesn't actually require the Commissioner to do anything with the complaints. It does not take account of the fact that the bodies listed at Section 2 of the Act may well change. So, for all those reasons, I'd ask Margaret Mitchell not to press Amendment 5.
Thank you. On the technical error point, it is a minor defect. It's not unusual to pass an amendment at this stage and to pick up on that technical error at stage 2, because it's the thrust of what we want to achieve here that is so fundamentally important. In terms of the Code of Practice not being mentioned specifically, the effect of the amendment is to ensure, as the UK IOC Commissioner said, that compliance with the Code of Practice will be achieved, and in order to do that it should be on the face of the bill, which is what the amendment does. I'm somewhat surprised at some comment, Rona Mackay's in particular, given that it was a unanimous recommendation of this committee that the Scottish Government includes a complaint mechanism within the bill to enable the public to refer issues to the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner on the use of biometrics by Police Scotland and the SPA, or on their lack of compliance with the Code of Practice. So to say, at this stage that you're totally opposed to it, I find really puzzling, because behind this recommendation, then the committee had a real concern. There is a risk to public confidence and transparency if a complaint mechanism is not included in the bill. And it's a view shared with the Law Society, who agrees a complaint mechanism should be included within the bill to enable the public to refer issues to the Scottish Commissioner on the use of biometrics where there is a lack of compliance with the Code of Practice. And the Cabinet Secretary is right, absolutely right, that systemic oversight should be robust. It's essential. These are very important powers, looking at people's very personal biometric data, and they should have the right to complain when they believe there has been a breach with that code. And that's what Amendment 5 does. And on that basis, I move it in my name. Press. Question is, Amendment 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We're not agreed. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. 5 in favour, 4 against. Amendment 5 is agreed to. Call Amendment 19 in the name of Liam MacArthur. In a group on its own, Liam MacArthur to move and speak to Amendment 19.
Thank you, Convener. As we heard in the earlier grouping, there's been a lot of debate through stage 1 about whether or not the remit and reach of the bill goes far enough. It was accepted, of course, that while the use of biometrics in policing requires robust regulation, this is a technology whose reach already extends far more widely, and where we need to ensure the regulatory framework and oversight powers meet the expectations of the public. Indeed, given how long it's taken to bring this bill before Parliament, since my former colleague Alice McInnes was raising concerns in the previous Parliament, it's fair to say we're playing catch-up. The question, I suppose, is whether we opt for a phased approach, starting with Police Scotland and a limited other range of bodies involved in the delivery of policing in this country, or seek to empower the Commissioner now to take the broadest possible view of the use of this technology. I think we explored in the earlier grouping some of those issues, and it's clear where the committee currently stands on that. However, given the pace in which the technology and the way it's being used is changing, there's always going to be a challenge ensuring that legislation remains fit for purpose. Amendment 19 would establish a process for review that would help to fine-tune the current remit and leave open the door for expanding the scope in future as appropriate and based on experience. Amnesty International, Open Rights Group and Scottish Human Rights Commission have raised their concerns about the proposed scope of the Commissioner's remit in their evidence, and as I said earlier, I've got a great deal of sympathy with those concerns. At the same time, there are risks in overstretching the Commissioner in the early stages. Establishing this role and function will take time, and it's crucial that the Commissioner can demonstrate effectiveness in carrying out his or her duties. I know from my correspondence with the Cabinet Secretary that it is his intention to keep the remit of the Commissioner under review, and while I welcome that commitment, it's perhaps a little vague and vulnerable to not surviving his departure from his current role. So in that sense, Amendment 19 seeks to add a little bit more certainty around that intention, and I look forward to hearing colleagues' comments and indeed the Cabinet Secretary's comments. But for now, I move the Amendment 19 in my name.
John Finney.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I support my colleague Liam MacArthur's Amendment 19, and I know an argument can be made that we can review anything any time. I think specifically making this request of ministers will give it a profile that's appropriate given the speed with which technology changes and the speed with which we might have to respond on occasions to some of the implications of the proliferation of public surveillance that there is. So I'm very supportive of this proposal.
Shona?
I guess I've got concerns about the laying down of the time frame, because there's one thing to have a commitment to post-legislative review, and I think that is always a good thing to have post-legislative reviews. However, to say that the power and functions has to be reviewed 3 years after the date of royal assent and at 5-yearly intervals thereafter. I'm just wondering if that might get in the way of a natural time frame for review. I mean, why those time frames, which might not make sense once things are up and running? It just seems very fixed and inflexible, and I'm just wondering, would it not be better to leave the time frame for review to the, I guess, discretion of what makes sense at that point in time, led by the Commissioner's view of what progress has been made, rather than to lay down in very fixed terms those time frames.
Fulton McGregor.
I just want to agree with that point as well, that although I see where Liam MacArthur's coming from, I won't be supporting this amendment. I do think we put in post-legislative scrutiny into the bill. I feel that sometimes, as a personal view, that we're almost trying to predict or mandate for what a future parliament made up of future members would want or think about that legislation at that time. So I do hear that, as John Finney said, the arguments can be made on the other side of that, that it's the job of us just now to look at what might be needed in the future. But I tend to be down on the other side, and I won't be supporting the amendment.
Anyone else? Can I just say, it seems to me that this strengthens parliamentary scrutiny, which is a very good thing, and 12 months does not, in my opinion, seem an unreasonable time to look at how this very important, very potentially intrusive legislation is working. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. I shall stick to remarks on the amendment rather than Liam MacArthur's prediction of my political demise. But I will, in terms of his amendment, while I understand the reasons for bringing it forward and I have a great degree of sympathy, I do also have, as he may understand, some concerns. Those concerns have been articulated well by both Shona Robinson and Fulton McGregor. What I would reiterate is they have already done a review, or a means of review already, of course, exists. Post-legislative scrutiny does not need to be hardwired into an act. Both the Parliament and the Government can conduct a review whenever they wish. They can do so at a time that is the most appropriate. That is surely preferable to being required to conduct a review at any particular time, which is selected in advance and which might not actually work well based on a whole load of other things that are going on at that pre-selected time. The committee will also be aware that the bill already provides for a lot of accountability and reporting to the Parliament on an ongoing basis through strategic plans, through budgets, annual reports and recommendations, and so on and so forth. There will also be parliamentary approval of the code of practice and any revisions to it. All of these can be triggers for ministers or Parliament to carry out post-legislative scrutiny at any time. This would allow a review to be conducted when we know there's an issue to be examined, again, rather than being required to do at a particular time, even if everybody is frankly content. As regards to reviewing the scope of the Commissioner's oversight, ministers have already taken powers allowing the bodies which the Commissioner has oversight of to be added to by means of regulations. Ministers will already, therefore, be keeping under review whether it's appropriate to exercise these powers. The amendment is also somewhat unusual compared to other compulsory post-legislative scrutiny examples in terms of being a recurring duty rather than being a one-off duty. I would question whether it's appropriate to commit time and to commit resource to almost a never-ending review or never-ending reviews, in fact, when everyone might be content that the Commissioner's functions are working perfectly well. Those compulsory recurring reviews may end up draining resources away from other issues which both the Parliament and the Government agree ought to be higher priority at that particular time. So therefore, while post-legislative scrutiny is important, and Liam MacArthur's amendment, I believe, is very well intentioned, I would suggest that hardwiring scrutiny arrangements into the Act would both be unnecessary and helpful. I ask him not to press Amendment 13, and again, I offer, as I always would, if he withdraws, to work with him in advance of Stage 3, if necessary.
Liam MacArthur, to wind up, press or withdraw.
Thanks very much, Convener. Can I start by thanking all who've contributed to the debate and the spirit in which they've offered their remarks. I thank John Finney and yourself, Convener, in particular, for your expressed support for the amendment. I think John Finney suggested it raises the profile of something one might expect to happen, but I don't think it's any less important or relevant for that. I listened very carefully to what Shona Robertson and Fulton McGregor suggested, and I can understand some anxieties around what appears to be a rigid timeframe. I think, to my mind, that in a sense sets the minimum requirements, a process in which the triggers are upfront and obvious. But I think if there were if circumstances were such that additional reviews were required because of revelations that gave rise to public concern, I don't think there's anything in this amendment that would prevent that from happening. The Cabinet Secretary again rightly pointed to the fact that post-legislative scrutiny is something open to government and indeed to the Parliament. I think we're all conscious that is a power that we've had from the get-go, and it's certainly been used in very exceptional circumstances rather than in a routine way. And the recurring nature of the duty, again, I can understand how there may be some anxiety that we get locked into a process that over time becomes less relevant. However, I think the nature of this technology, and we've all talked about the speed at which it's changing, it seems to me that it is unlikely over the foreseeable future that the need to constantly keep this under review is going to diminish in any way at all. And therefore, I think at this stage, notwithstanding that the government may want to work with me ahead of stage 3 to put in further refinements, at this stage I'm minded to press my Amendment 19.
The question is that Amendment 19 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. Those in favour, please show. Those against? 5 in favour, 4 against. Amendment 19 is agreed. Call Amendment 20 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with Amendments 35, 21 and 36. Cabinet Secretary move Amendment 20 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. My Amendment 20 is intended to make a clear link between the principles set out in the Commissioner's general functions under Section 2.1 of the Bill and the content of the Code of Practice. This was something that committee had asked me to do in its Stage 1 report, and I'm happy to oblige. The Commissioner's general function is to support and promote the adoption of lawful, effective and ethical practices in relation to the acquisition, retention, use and destruction of biometric data for criminal justice and policing purposes. Anything that the Commissioner does, including preparing the Code of Practice, should be in furtherance of that general function. This amendment therefore makes clear that the Commissioner must prepare a code that is designed to support and promote the adoptions of lawful, effective and ethical practices, again in relation to the acquisition, retention, use and destruction of biometric data. Turning to other amendments, onto Liam Kerr's Amendment 35 and 36. These require the Commissioner to have regard to specific principles when preparing or revising the Code of Practice. These include the principles of promoting and protecting human rights, privacy and public confidence, as well as the principle of ensuring individual and community safety. I consider these amendments to provide a reasonable balance between specifying what the Code should include and preserving the independence of the Commissioner to decide what the Code should cover. Well, I don't think they're strictly necessary. I'm happy to support the general principles of these amendments if Liam Kerr wishes to proceed with them, despite the comfort already offered by my Amendment 20. I would, however, note some technical concerns, particularly around aspects of Amendment 36. For example, the reference to revising a code in Amendment 36 is confusing, because there's already a default rule in Section 6.5 of the Bill that sets out which sections about the code also applies to revised codes. Therefore, it would be clearer to apply this general rule to the new section proposed by Liam Kerr. I also consider some of the other language in the amendment will require further consideration. For example, the reference to the principle of ensuring the safety of individuals and communities could be considered problematic because it's not something the Commissioner can ensure, although they can, of course, recognise the importance of it. So I therefore ask Liam Kerr not to press Amendments 35 and 36 at this time. If he does wish to proceed with them, then I'd be happy to work with him to agree suitable amendments to the technical aspects ahead of Stage 3. Turning to Lee McArthur's amendment, Amendment 21, which requires the Code of Practice to include a presumption of destruction of biometric data 3 years after the data was acquired. I fully recognise the member's concern. You articulated it well in stage 1 for a clear direction to be given by the Commissioners regarding retention periods. I do, however, have strong concerns about the amendment, which I will happily explain. If this amendment was supported, then it would specifically require a change in policy and procedure which is not entirely aligned with the law as set out under the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995. A presumption of destruction of data after the expiry of 3 years, as suggested in the amendment, does not fully take into account the provisions in the 1995 Act, which in some cases only allows biometric data to be retained for up to 2 years. The 1995 Act also allows retention periods to be extended by a sheriff in some cases. It's not clear how it is expected that this presumption would fit with that power. It should be noted that the police are already bound by the European Convention of Human Rights and data protection laws regarding retention periods for biometric data. I've previously committed to conducting a review of retention periods contained in the 1995 Act once the Commissioner is in post. If retention periods are to be set, it would make far more sense, I would suggest, for these to be consulted upon by the Commissioner and set by the Commissioner within the Code of Practice, given that the Code will be subject to consideration and approval of Parliament. That would mean retention periods would benefit from flexibility of being contained in the Code, and Parliament would be able to approve retention periods when it approves the commencement of the Code of Practice. It would also mean the period could be changed to reflect changing circumstances. But if the amendment was supported, then the presumption could not be adjusted either to opt for a longer or indeed a shorter period. Even if the Code were to set rules about retention periods, that would have to be done in a way that was clear and did not appear in the face of it to contradict existing law. So I therefore ask Liam MacArthur, with these serious reservations, not to press Amendment 21, and I move Amendment 20 in my name.
Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 21 and other amendments in the group. Oh, sorry, I've taken you out of order. It's always these Liams that get me. Liam Kerr to speak to Amendment 35 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. At the outset, I'm happy to support the Cabinet Secretary's Amendment 20, and I'd be very interested. I'm glad you brought me in first, because I'm very interested to hear Mr MacArthur's responses to the Cabinet Secretary on Amendment 21. In terms of Amendment 35, this simply inserts the relevant section such that if the committee is with me on Amendment 36, this will be required. Amendment 36, which is the substantive point, picks up the committee's recommendation at paragraph 206 of the report. That recommendation is that the principles underpinning the Commissioner's role and the purpose of the Code and Practice in promoting various items and the principle of delivering community safety should be included in the bill. So Amendment 36 simply seeks to codify these principles to which the Commissioner must have regard when preparing or revising a code. I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for his comments. He says that the reference to revision is confusing and that there are further technical amendments that will require considered at some point. It would be my preference to press the amendment, and then I'd be very pleased to take the opportunity to work with the Cabinet Secretary to amend to the optimum level going forward at stage 3. So I'd be pleased to have the committee's support for Amendments 35 and 36.
Okay. Any questions from... Oh, sorry. Liam, I'm determined to either get you first in or miss you out completely. Okay, to speak to Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 21 and the other amendments in the group.
Thanks very much, Convener. I didn't realise the earlier invitation was a once-only opportunity. Can I start by welcoming the other amendments in the group, and certainly supportive of those in principle, even though I think the Cabinet Secretary identified one or two misgivings that would need to be addressed with Amendments 35 and 36. In terms of Amendment 21, I heard the Cabinet Secretary had to say, which, paraphrasing, kind of fell into the category of inconsistency and rigidity. I have to say that Amendment 21 was brought forward principally to align the rules around the retention of biometric data. At the moment, there's a disparity between the regulation of DNA and fingerprints and the regulation of photos. held by the police, while DNA and fingerprints are regulated, as Cabinet Secretary acknowledged, under the 95 Act. Photos are not. It was an issue that was recognised by my colleague Alison McInnes during the passage 5 years ago of the Criminal Justice Bill, and since then HMICS the Independent Advisory Group have both found governance gaps and for those to be a concern. In his review, John Scott QC recommended a presumption of deletion of biometric data after the expiry of prescribed minimum retention periods. And while Police Scotland has since updated their policy, there is still no legislative requirement for images to be deleted. In evidence recently to the Justice Subcommittee, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable Duncan Sloan confirmed that the current rules around what the police can do with images of the public are, quote, not as clear as the rules around fingerprints and DNA, and that new governance arrangements would be, quote, absolutely valued and very much welcome. Similarly, DSC Sean Scott of Police Scotland supported the IAG recommendation of a presumption for deletion of biometric data as a central part of the oversight system established by the bill. He stated that, quote, one of the IAG's 9 recommendations was about the retention periods and a presumption of deletion, and that is absolutely right. Research by the Scottish Lib Dems revealed at the weekend that over 375,000 images were supplied to the Police National Database from Police Scotland's criminal history system since 2014, all with no clear legal requirement for their deletion should the individuals concerned be found to be innocent. Facial recognition may well be invaluable for modernising the way police investigate crime going forward, but unregulated it poses a potential threat to human rights and to civil liberties, as well as we've heard repeatedly from Police Scotland themselves, to the reputation of our police. And on that basis, I will be... Yeah, certainly.
A very quick one, Mr MacArthur. Just simply, where does the 3 years figure come from?
In terms of 3 years, it's with a view to bring it in line with DNA and fingerprints, and therefore the idea is to deliver a degree of consistency across the deletion periods, the retention periods for biometrics.
Shona?
Really on that point, I mean, given you in your opening remarks, you talked about a disparity already existing, and given surely getting the retention periods right would require a consultation in its own right, would it not, in order to get to the right retention periods, given we have the disparity at the moment? So wouldn't it be better for that to be something the Commissioner, him or herself, would undertake, rather than us at this point in time fixing that 3 years is somehow the right answer, given it's based on what currently happens, rather than a consultation about what would be ideal and what would be the best on the basis of evidence taken by the stakeholders who are on the cold face of dealing with these issues? Would that not be preferable rather than fixing it at 3 years?
Please.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I take the point around consistency. I don't think what we've heard is any concerns around the retention periods that are currently in place, and therefore having a consistency with that doesn't seem an unreasonable proposition to take. I mean, it's certainly open to the Commissioner in due course if there's a belief that the retention periods are out of alignment with what public expectation is, or the use of the technology, then that is something that can happen. But I think at this stage, with the bill in front of us, there's an opportunity to bring a degree of consistency around that retention policy, as we heard, not least from Police Scotland, would be desirable and very welcome in terms of providing clarity.
Okay. Can I say happy to support the Cabinet Secretary's amendment? In terms of amendment number 35 and the Kersner, it's quite clear what the intent is. If wording could be approved, something that can be looked at again at stage 3, but no reason not to, if the committee is so minded, pass this now to set out a very clear message about the importance of human rights, etc., being on the face of the bill. In terms of Liam MacArthur's, if I understood Liam properly, then DNA and fingerprint, the retention period is 3 years. It may differ for other things, but the important thing is, after 3 years, there will be a presumption, and if there is good reason for that to be retained, for this information to be retained after that, then that will be clear and transparent and will be set out. But in terms of human rights and making sure there's no abuses, it seems to me a sensible way to go. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. Again, I just reiterate my offer to Liam Kerr in terms of his amendments 35 and 36. My preference would be that he didn't press them and work with government in advance of stage 3, but if he does press them, then the offer, of course, still remains and still stands if committee was to support those amendments. In terms of Liam Kerr's, I just go back. I know when he took the intervention from Liam Kerr, he said this was aligning with DNA. It'd be important to make the point that in some cases DNA, the retention period is 2 years, not 3 years, for example, for road traffic offences. So there is not an exact alignment in relation to DNA with the amendment that Liam MacArthur, brings forward. But also, I don't think the point was addressed around, in certain cases, where a sheriff may choose for purposes of advancing justice, I have to say, particularly pertinent in sexual offences cases, to extend those retention periods. Yes, of course I will.
Thanks very much. I think this was a point picked up actually by the convener. I think what we're talking about is a presumption in relation to the retention periods, and I think where there is a sound case for retaining those images, as it would be with DNA and fingerprints, I don't think there would be any expectation that the presumption would override those legitimate concerns.
About it being a presumption, and not a flat out explicit retention period fixed. But I suppose my point on my concern also is that there's no doubt at all that a code of practice, without impinging on the independence of a commissioner, there's no doubt at all that a code of practice would look at things like a retention period, and that is why I would suggest that the flexibility given with the code of practice coming in through regulation, as opposed to having something on the face of the bill, would be much more preferable. I think Liam MacArthur, in his own remarks to a previous amendment, had mentioned the fast-paced evolving nature of the technologies that we're dealing with. None of us can probably predict what that data will look like in 5, 10, 15, let alone 20 years. And therefore, retention periods on the face of the bill have an inflexibility and a rigidity to them that having them in the code of practice would not. So again, I would reiterate my concerns about the retention periods on the face of the bill and Liam MacArthur's amendment 21, and would ask him not to press and confirm moving the amendment in my name.
Okay. Question is that Amendment 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. Call Amendment 35 in the name of Liam Kerr, already debated, with Amendment 20. Liam Kerr to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 35 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not all agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour, please show. Those against? 5 in favour, 4 against. Amendment 35 is agreed to. Call Amendment 21, in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated, with Amendment 20. Liam MacArthur to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not all agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour, please show. Yep. Those against, please show. 5 in favour, 4 against. Amendment 21 is agreed to. Call Amendment 22 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with amendments as shown in the groupings. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 22 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you. Convener, this group of amendments, when taken together, seeks to provide enhanced arrangements for Parliament to scrutinise the first code of practice, which the Commissioner produces, to accommodate this new steps in the process. This new step in the process, it's been necessary to restructure Section 6 of the bill and to amend Section 8 and Section 9. But ultimately, this set of amendments in my name responds positively to a Stage 1 report recommendation, which sought more time for Parliament to scrutinise the content of the first code of practice, and a process allowing it to do so separately from its scrutiny of the regulations bringing the code into effect. Amendment 26 is the principal amendment in this group. It inserts a new section to allow for further process in the first code of practice being agreed to by Parliament. Having gained Minister's approval, the Commissioner must lay the code before Parliament for consideration. The Commissioner must have regard to any representations made to them within 60 days of laying the draft. Representations can be made to the Commissioner by anyone, so this would cover MSPs, but also indeed members of the public. In calculating the 60-day period, no account is taken of instances when Parliament is in recess for more than 4 days or when it is dissolved. This procedural step, which will apply in relation to the first code, is in addition to the existing requirement that any code can only be brought into effect by the Parliament approving affirmative regulations under Section 9. This is always the final step in the process. The rest of the amendments are consequential. Amendment 22 and 27 simply adjust the location of some provisions so as to allow sections 6 to 9 to set out the enhanced process in chronological order. Amendments 23, 25 and 28 adjust cross-references in text in light of the restructuring, and Amendment 29 simply ensures that reporting on the Code of Practice starts running from the date of the first code. I hope committee will see in the group of amendments the fulfilment of the wish for additional time and procedure to consider the first Code of Practice carefully. To be clear, later iterations of the code would not be sent to Parliament for 60 days. Rather, they would follow the second part of the parliamentary approval process only. However, this is in line with the committee's recommendations and would still ensure that later iterations of the code would be approved by regulations under the affirmative procedure. I suppose the important point here is that this is the Commissioner who is drafting the code in consultation with stakeholders. The code is then approved by Scottish ministers, and then in the final step, the code is considered by Parliament when deciding whether and when to bring it into effect. That way we have a code which has reached broad consensus, but in the case of the first code, there is now also the added guarantee of an additional period of parliamentary scrutiny, which is separate from the regulations bringing the code into effect, and I therefore move Amendment 22 in my name.
Do members have any questions? No. Question is that Amendment 22 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. Call Amendment 23 in the name of Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 22. Cabinet Secretary to formally move.
Moved.
Okay, the question is Amendment 23 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that Section 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Call Amendment 36 in the name of Liam Kerr, already debated with Amendment 20. Liam Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We're not all agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. 5 in favour, 4 against. Amendment 36 is agreed. Call Amendment 6 in the name of John Finney, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. I point out that if Amendment 8 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 37, as this is a preemption. John Finney to move Amendment 6 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. This is a subject that exercised us in our taking the scrutiny that subsequently led to our compiling Stage 1 report, and it is about the term, and I formally move Amendment 6 in my name, replacing having regard to with a requirement to comply with the legislation. Now, people might find it a little strange that we have this piece of proposed law in front of us, and in Section 7, Paragraph 3, which is covered by my Amendment 3, it says at the moment, failure to have regard to the Code of Practice does not in itself give rise to grounds for any legal action. I think we need to understand that if we're putting in place legislation, it needs to be a robust legislation that those that it's targeted have due regard to. And I don't doubt that the pleasant there's a willingness on the part of Police Scotland, as configured at the moment, to follow. But I can't see what the difficulty is with this. We put in place a professional oversight of important pieces of legislation, having significant impact on the citizens' human rights. And I think it's only right that those whom judgments are made on comply with what's suggested in the Code of Practice rather than have regard to. So that's Amendment 6 and Amendment 8. In relation to one of the other amendments in the group, forgive me, Amendment 41 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Excuse me, yes. The idea that it allows revocation of compliance at any time, again, just seems to fall on the face of what we should be intending to do here. So I won't be supporting that, but I would hope members would support Amendment 6 in my name. Thank you.
Okay. Cabinet Secretary to speak to Amendment 37 and other amendments in the group.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'll begin by stating that I support John Finney's Amendments 6, 9 and 12, which seek to replace the words have regard to with comply with in connection with how the Code of Practice is to be observed. These complement my own amendments in this group, and I'd ask members to support Amendments 6, 9 and 12 as well as my own. Turning now to my own amendments 38 to 42. Taken together, these amendments will enhance the existing power of the Commissioner to deal with failures to comply with the Code of Practice. In proposing these amendments, I've been mindful of the committee's desire to see stronger enforcement in the bill. This was a common theme, almost a constant theme of the Stage 1 debate, and I said at that time that I would reflect on what was said by John Finney, and I think of almost every member that spoke about this issue and give it careful consideration. I believe that the new provisions that I'm putting forward represent the best means of ensuring compliance with the Code. Amendment 38 strengthens the Commissioner's powers and operates in conjunction with John Finney's Amendment 6. Amendment 38 would enable the Commissioner to issue a compliance notice to a person who they consider has failed or is failing to comply with the Code of Practice. This could be done instead of or as well as reporting on the failure under the Commissioner's existing name and shame powers. Amendment 39 specifies the content of a compliance notice. It must include matters such as the steps that must be taken to address the breach of the Code and the timescales for doing so. Amendment 40 allows the Commissioner to vary a compliance notice in order to allow more time for compliance, or with the consent of the person to whom the notice was issued, to change the steps that are required to be taken. Amendment 41 allows the Commissioner to revoke a compliance notice. This is about the Commissioner, to respond to John Finney's expressed concern. This is about the Commissioner having flexibility. It could not be done unilaterally by anyone else. Amendment 42 allows the Commissioner to report a refusal or failure without reasonable excuse to comply with a compliance notice to the Court of Session. This amendment allows the Court, after hearing evidence or representations on the matter, to make an order to enforce the compliance notice or to deal with the refusal or failure to comply with the notice as if it were a contempt of court, an issue I know we will be coming to later on. As the committee may recall, the Court can also do both of these things in relation to a failure or refusal to comply with an information notice under Section 12 of the Bill. Convener, when it comes to complying with the Code of Practice, my view is that the Commissioner's existing powers to make recommendations and to follow up by reporting these matters to Parliament are sufficient for all but the most extreme cases. I would therefore hope that the additional powers set out in my amendments will rarely, if ever, be used. But I do recognise the committee's concerns. I wanted to provide reassurance that further enforcement action can be taken. Turning to my Amendment 37, this changes Section 7.3 as a consequence of Amendment 6, so that all references are to complying with the Code of Practice. If my amendment were accepted, then Section 7.3 would state that a failure to comply with the Code of Practice does not itself give rise to grounds for any legal action. John Finney's Amendment 8 seeks to remove Section 7.3 completely. However, I would wish it to remain. This is because its presence makes very clear, when read with Section 7.2, that while a court or tribunal must take the Code of Practice into account when determining any question to which is relevant, a failure to comply with the Code is not grounds for legal action in itself. It is there as part of a package with Section 7.2. It is common for Acts to provide expressly, for the avoidance of any doubt, that breach of a code does not itself give rise to criminal or civil liability. Indeed, it is what this committee approved in relation to the Stop and Search Code under the Criminal Justice Scotland Act 2016.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I'm grateful for that. With regard to my Amendment 8, and in a very stark reading of subsection 3, it's certainly your view that failure to have regard to the Code of Practice could give rise to legal proceedings, is that?
I would just say that the points I've made, I mean, Amendment 8, my belief is that to would remove this certainty, but without providing, I suppose, for an accessible remedy to apply. As I say, it's not uncommon for this to be expressly said on the face of a bill. As I say, it's not uncommon. There's precedent for it. But just to be clear, under the new compliance notice, which I've proposed, it would still be correct to say that a failure to comply with the code does not in itself give rise for civil or criminal proceedings. Instead, it would give rise, as I think the member is aware, to the issue of a compliance notice. If that compliance notice is not complied with, then that would give rise potentially to legal action in the form as I've set out in Amendment 42. So hopefully that gives the member some reassurance, which provides explicitly for an accessible civil remedy. I appreciate that John Finney wants to see the code be complied with and wants to ensure that there can be a consequence if there's no compliance. I certainly agree with him on that, but I would suggest that my amendments around compliance notices provide for this more effectively. So I would ask him not to press Amendment 8 and to support my Amendment 37 instead.
Any questions from members? There was considerable debate about the have regard to provision during stage 1, and I know John Finney has come up with a new set of work, the comply with, on the basis that both the Cabinet Secretary's amendment 37 and John Finney's amendment 6 will strengthen adherence to the code, then I certainly think they are worth supporting. John Finney, to wind up, press or withdraw.
Thank you, Convener. I won't add more. I think it's important that the energies that's gone into the compilation of this legislation, that there's subsequently that there's due regard to it. So I hope members will support my Amendment 6 and I press it. Thank you.
Okay. The question is that Amendment 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. We are agreed. Call Amendment 24 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with Amendment 16, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 24 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Are agreed. Call Amendment 7 in the name of James Kelly, already debated, with Amendment 16, James Kelly, to move or not move?
Not moved.
The question is that Amendment 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Well agreed. Thank you. Call Amendment...
It's not moved. Did you say
oh, sorry. Sorry. Not moved. James Kelly, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved, sorry. Then we move on. Call Amendment 8 in the name of John Finney, already debated, with Amendment 6. John Finney, to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Moved. The question is Amendment 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? 8, that's Amendment 8. No, we're not all agreed. Is anyone in favour? Those in favour? Oh, sorry. No, I'm just saying. Are we all... Is there anyone... Right. We'll have a division. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. Right. Right. Amendment 8 is not agreed. We go to Amendment 37 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with Amendment 6, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
Right. Question is that Amendment 37 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. We are agreed. The question is that Section 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yep. Call Amendment 25 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with Amendment 22, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
Question is Amendment 25 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. No. No. We are not agreed. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. Right.
Sorry, can we just take that one again?
Yeah. Those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3.
Those against, please show.
7
Okay.
2 against.
Right. 7 in favour, 2 against. So Amendment 5 is agreed to. The question is that Section 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Call Amendment 26, 27, 28 on the name of the Cabinet Secretary, all previously debated. Invite the Cabinet Secretary to move these amendments 26 to 28 on block.
Moved on block.
Does any member object to a single question being put on amendments 26 to 28? No. The question is therefore that amendment 26 to 20 are agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Okay. And those in favour, please show. Those against, please. Sorry, was I too quick for you?
That's okay. Seven in favour.
7 in favour, 2 against. Therefore, we are all agreed. Question is that section 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Yes. Call amendment 29 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 22. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. We are agreed. Question is that section 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Agreed. Call amendment 9 in the name of John Finney, already debated with amendment 6. John Finney to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Yes. The question is that amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, we are all agreed. Question is that section 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes. Call amendment 10 in the name of John Finney, grouped with amendments 11, 1 and 2. John Finney to move amendment 10 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Legislation can be a mystery sometimes, and I have to say that this particular 12 subsection 2 I found confusing at the time, and it's for that reason. And if I may quote it, the Commissioner may also report the matter to the Court of Assessors when the Commissioner considers that a person who is mentioned is likely to do any of the things. It does seem to me that that is a peculiar way of dealing with legislation, and for that reason I would seek to have it removed.
Sorry. Right, moved in your name. Thank you. Gordon Lyndhurst to speak to Amendment 1 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. The amendment in question in my name relates to Section 12 of the bill, and a matter that I raised in the Stage 1 debate with the Cabinet Secretary to do with the possibility of someone being held in contempt of court for failing to comply with an information notice issued by the Commissioner. The Cabinet Secretary kindly wrote to me following the debate in response to the issues that I raised, and I thank him for that, so I'll not go into them in much detail. He's indicated a number of similar, if not identical, provisions in acts within the past 20 years. What I'm interested in, the provision as it stands in the face of the bill seems to me somewhat draconian, because it seems to relate to not an actual failure to follow through on a court order, but rather the information notice from the Commissioner. And it seems to me that even if there are similar provisions in other acts, this is not necessarily the appropriate way to deal with this, because contempt of court is quite a serious matter. And clearly, if someone is in breach of a contempt of an order of a court, then one knows what one is dealing with. But if it's just a notice from the Information Commissioner, I'm not sure it falls into the same category. So I'm interested to know from the Justice Secretary why he feels that this is the appropriate way to deal with this particular aspect of enforcement of the bill or the provisions of the bill, and ensuring that they are complied with, because I still don't see that it is appropriate to have contempt of court provisions in this way in the bill, and hence the amendment before the committee.
Members have any comments? No. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. I'll turn to John Finney's amendments and then come to Gordon Lyndhurst's amendments. In terms of amendments 10 and 11, I recognise that John Finney's amendments arise from concerns raised during the Stage 1 debate regarding how the Commissioner could use the power in Section 12 to refer matters to the court, simply based on their consideration of what a person was likely to do, as he referenced in his remarks. However, the power in Section 12.2 of the bill is important, particularly in relation to Section 12.1c. For example, if the Commissioner has reason to believe that a person will destroy information, then the Commissioner can use the power in Section 12.2 to apply to the Court of Session for an order to stop the destruction of important information. If the Commissioner has to wait until that actually happens before going to the court, it would be too late. If an application is made to the court will hear evidence in the matter. I would need to be convinced that it was appropriate to take action. It is therefore not just about what the Commissioner believes. It should also be noted that this is a power which has precedent. Schedule 2 of the Scottish Commission for Human Rights Act 2006 provides the Scottish Human Rights Commission with the same ability to refer a matter to the court for consideration where they consider that it is likely that their equivalent information notices will be breached. I hope that members are reassured by my explanation as to why a provision is included in the bill, and therefore would ask John Finney not... Yes, I
An
will.
intervention before he concludes. Thank you. I'm grateful for you doing that, Cabinet Secretary. I mean, these are clearly very serious matters, and you rightly refer to 12 subsection 1 subsection C, alters, suppresses, conceals and destroys without reasonable. These are very important matters and shows the importance of this legislation. So I welcome that explanation. I think it's important to get on the record the seriousness of some of the implications it could give rise to the use of this power, and the reason why, therefore, I'm pleased that we previously agreed that the code is given a status of compliance rather than regard to. So, thank you.
Yes, no problem. Thank John Finney for his remarks, and I thank him for the work that he's done in relation to strengthening the compliance with the Code of Practice as opposed to having regards to. But with everything I've said, I hope he therefore will not press Amendments 10 and 11. Turning to Gordon Lyndhurst's Amendments 1 and 2, I do acknowledge the concerns that you raised. I reflected very carefully and discussed them with my officials about holding somebody in contempt of court. As you mentioned in your remarks, of course, I wrote to both you and Liam Kerr, who both raised concerns about such matters. On the 21st of January, I wrote to you around further clarification, and I recognise these amendments have been brought forward despite those reassurances, and I know you're still seeking some reassurances around why what you consider to be quite a heavy-handed approach being taken. But let me hopefully give you some of those reassurances, if I may. I suppose the first thing to say is that it would only be for the court and the court alone, after hearing any evidence or representations of the matter, to find somebody in contempt for failing to refuse to provide information. There is no suggestion that it would be for the Commissioner to find anybody in contempt of court. It's envisaged that a person would only be found in contempt of court where there has been an egregious failure to provide information to the Commissioner, a really serious breach. A contempt of court is an important sanction in relation to situations where someone has destroyed information that they were required to produce. And perhaps this answers Gordon Lyndhurst's question directly. When it comes to destroying information that they were required to produce, in those cases, it's extremely unlikely that the court would grant an order for the production of information knowing that it's already been destroyed. How could they or would they be able to do that? The court therefore needs to be able to have some form of sanction available to it, or else people will be able to destroy information potentially with impunity. Yes, of course.
Intervention. Is the Cabinet Secretary saying that it would only be where the court had issued an order that it would then, in relation to an information notice, that it would then have the sanction of contempt of court, or purely in relation to where the Commissioner had issued a notice and the court had not actually issued any order itself in relation to that?
It would be on the back of a compliance order or compliance notice being referred by the Commissioner as opposed to by the court. That it would be then for the court to determine, after hearing representation and evidence, on whether or not they were in contempt of court. So it would be after a Commissioner or after the Commissioner has brought forward a compliance notice. And as I say, this is not an unusual sanction. In the letter that I wrote to Gordon Lyndhurst, MSP, it is a power that the court, I would suggest, would be trusted to use responsibly. It's, as I say, a power that's precedented already. There is a breach in the equivalent information notices under the Scottish Commission for Human Rights Act 2006 or the Freedom of Information Act 2002. The court has the power to deal with the matter as contempt. The court is also in a similar position in relation to obstruction of Scottish Public Service Ombudsman under Section 14 of the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman Act 2002. So I hope the members are reassured by my explanation as to why such a provision is included in the bill, and would therefore ask Gordon Lyndhurst not to press Amendments 1 and 2.
Press or withdraw.
I think there's been helpful discussions this morning. I think we have strengthened the bill, and particularly with regard to the status afforded of requirement to comply. And thank the Cabinet Secretaries for their helpful comments on my Amendment 10. In light of that, I would seek not to press Amendment 10, Convener.
Thank you. Withdraw. Call Amendment 11 in the name of John Finney, already debated with Amendment 10. John Finney, to move or not move?
Not move.
Not move. Call Amendment 1 in the name of Gordon Lyndhurst, already debated with Amendment 10. Gordon Lyndhurst, to move or not move?
At this stage, I'll not move.
Not moved. Call Amendment 2 in the name of Gordon Lyndhurst, already debated with Amendment 10. Gordon Lyndhurst, to move or not move?
Not move.
Okay. The question is that Section 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Question is that Sections 13 and 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Call Amendment 13 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with Amendment 4. Liam MacArthur, to move or not move?
On the basis of the Cabinet Secretary's invitation to work on alternative, I'll not move at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Call Amendment 12 in the name of John Finney, already debated with Amendment 6. John Finney, to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Move. Question is that Amendment 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Call Amendment 13 in the name of John Finney, already debated with Amendment 4. John Finney, to move or not move?
Not move, Convener.
Not moved. Question is that Section 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Question is that Sections 16 and 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Call Amendments 38, 39, 40, 41, 42 on the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 38 to 42 en bloc.
Moved on block.
Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 38 to 42? Question is therefore Amendments 38, that Amendments 38 to 42 are agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. We are agreed. And the question is that Sections 18 to 22 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Call Amendment 31 in the name of Liam MacArthur and a group on its own, Liam MacArthur, to move and speak to Amendment 31.
Thanks, Convener. Conscious of time, I'll try and be brief as I can. The Independent Advisory Group recommended that an ethics advisory group be established as part of the oversight arrangements. The remit of the group would be to work with the Commissioner and others to promote ethical considerations in the acquisition, retention, use and disposal of biometric technologies and biometric data. The Scottish Government accepted this recommendation and committed to develop proposals for its remit and membership in discussions with stakeholders, drawing on the connections and relationships that have been developed through the work of the IAG. However, the bill does not provide for this. The Human Rights Commission said that was, quote, regrettable, and said that the IAG report rationalised the need for such a group quite clearly. They drew on evidence of the success of the Biometrics and Forensic Ethics Group in England and Wales. Cabinet Secretary has said that he will form an independently chaired reference group to deal with ethical issues, which, quote, will be established at around the same time that the new Biometrics Commissioner takes office. Well, this is welcome in as far as it goes. I think the centrality of questions around ethics to ensuring public confidence in the framework and oversight arrangements we are putting in place demands the establishment of an ethics advisory group on a statutory footing, as proposed by my Amendment 31, which I have pleasure in moving, and I look forward to debate in the committee. Thank you.
Yes. Any members? John Fulton.
Thank you very much, Convener. Yes, I warmly welcome this as amendment. As my colleague Lee MacArthur said, it was the Independent Advisory Group's recommendation. So I do agree with the Scottish Human Rights Council that it is regrettable. It's regrettable because, for a number of reasons, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity also to understand that the role that bodies such as that have played, for instance, in the way that the police have gone about the deployment of digital triage devices, so-called cyber kiosks, and the welcome involvement there. And it is a very good, inclusive way of ensuring that there's a broad range of views taken on board. So I strongly support Amendment 31 in Liam MacArthur's name.
Fulton.
Thanks, Convener. I've got sympathy with this amendment, and I think that it's probably fair to say that everybody on the committee would want the same outcome. Where I disagree with the amendment is I'm not sure at this stage if having it, and I hear what the other two members have said already, but I'm not sure whether having it as legislation is required, and whether that's, you know, we're just looking to legislate for something that we've already had assurances from the Cabinet Secretary on. Also bringing it into legislation perhaps you know, blurs boundaries and roles. I think if we're implementing a bill to bring in a commissioner, we should be giving that person the full role of picking who, you know, not picking who, but picking the remit for the Ethics Advisory Group. But I think I won't be supporting this amendment, but I think it's on the principle of whether it should be in legislation at this stage or not, as opposed to the basis and the premise of the amendment.
Anyone else? I believe this is a recommendation that the committee unanimously supported at stage 1. Interested to hear the Cabinet Secretary's views.
Thank you, Convener. While I, to reflect what Fulton said, can understand where the good intentions of this amendment come forward, I can't support it in its current format. I consider the way that the amendment provides for the Ethics Advisory Group to function is somewhat convoluted, with decision-making on issues relating to membership being split between the Commissioner, the Scottish Ministers and the Parliament. For example, the regulations to be made by Ministers and therefore scrutinised by Parliament are to specify the number of members. However, the Commissioner would then appoint the members. Given that the Commissioner is to be an independent office holder accountable to Parliament and parliamentary cooperation, I'm not convinced it is appropriate for Ministers to be involved at all. But the amendment leaves a whole host of matters to be decided in regulations by Ministers. In addition, the amendment specifies the matters which the group is to provide advice on. In principle, I would agree that this is reasonable. However, in terms of future-proofing, this could be restrictive and confusing. For example, the amendment calls the group an ethics advisory group and tasks it with the oversight of ethics. However, in subsection 3b, it then requires the group to advise on legal issues arising too. I consider that the amendment, as it currently stands, would give a mixed message as to the remit of the group. There is also no ability for the remit to be adjusted in the future, as the regulation making powers set out in subsection 6 are not wide enough to cover the remit. I explained to the committee in my response to the Stage 1 report that I fully support the formation of an advisory group, and I will honour the public commitment that was made to establish such a group. I was not convinced by the calls during Stage 1 that the group should be placed on a statutory footing, and the Independent Advisory Group on Biometric Data in Scotland previously made no such recommendation. I would have strongly preferred for the Commissioner, once in post, to consult and secure a broad range of views on these matters to allow proper discussion. The Commissioner could then decide which matters he or she needed to give advice on, given that any such group should report directly to the Commissioner. This would allow the necessary flexibility as how the group should operate. Finally, there is a number of technical issues with the amendment as it currently stands. These are principally concerning consistency of language, as well as cross-references to the sources of the regulation making power, which is found in section 6, not section 7. I therefore ask Liam MacArthur not to press amendment 31. And of course, I make the offer to him that, considering some of the technical challenges, but also I would suggest some of the challenges in substance around some of the mixed messages that are being sent out by the amendment in terms of responsibilities between Parliament, Commissioner and Ministers, then I'm happy, if he didn't press the amendment, to work with him to agree a suitable amendment ahead of Stage 3.
Liam MacArthur, to wind up, press or withdraw.
Thanks. Convener, can I again start by thanking everybody who's contributed to the debate. I think you're right, Convener, in reminding the committee of the unanimous recommendation from the committee at Stage 1, as well as the recommendation from the advisory group itself. I think John Finney is right to flag up the issue of cyber kiosks, which I think has brought into stark relief that this issue around ethics and legal issues and legal framework, and I think there is an overlap there. So the language that the Cabinet Secretary referred to as being slightly confused within the amendment, I think it captures very well some of the issues that have been thrown up by the proposed rollout of cyber kiosks. I think we have had assurances from the Cabinet Secretary about taking forward measures to reflect what he understands to be the recommendation from the advisory group. But I think by putting this on a statutory footing within the bill, I think we set it very firmly at the centre of how we believe the governance and the oversight needs to function in this area. So while I welcome the offer to work with me over the next few weeks ahead of stage 3 to tidy things up, I think it would be important at stage 2 to put in place this amendment, and as I say, I'm on that basis moving the amendment 31.
The question is that Amendment 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. There will be a division. Those in favour, please show. Okay. Those against? 5 in favour, 4 against. Amendment 31 is agreed. Called Amendment 32 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Group with Amendments 33 and 34. Cabinet Secretary move Amendment 32 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I'll be brief. The committee asked in its Stage 1 report that I consider excuse me, how the definition in Section 23 could keep pace with future developments in biometrics. I believe that the definition is already broadly drawn. However, my Amendment 33 inserts a power for Scottish ministers to change or clarify the meaning of biometric data by regulations. My Amendment 34 makes that power subject to the affirmative procedure. This allows Parliament to fully scrutinise any changes Scottish ministers propose to make to the definition of biometric data. Amendment 32 makes a minor amendment to the definition to clarify that it includes not only a photograph or other recording of an individual's full body, but also of any parts of the body, such as an arm, which may have a distinguishing mark, such as a tattoo, for example. Therefore, I move Amendment 32 in my name.
Do any members have any questions? No. The question is that Amendment 32 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Agreed. The question is that Section 23 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Call Amendment 33 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 32. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 33 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Right. Question is that Section 24 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Yeah. Call Amendment 34 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 32. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Question is Amendment 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Question is that Section 25 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. The question is that Section 26 and 27 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that Schedule 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Question is that Section 28 and 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is the long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That ends consideration of the bill. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for attending. We have gone on a little bit longer to ensure that we got through all the stage 2 amendments. So on that basis, is the committee agreed to take the outstanding agenda items at our next meeting, which will be on will be advised by the clerks?
Yes, agreed.
Thank you, agreed. I formally close this meeting.